health to wealth and everything in between. Welcome to the Weekend Collective on NewsTalk ZB.
4:06 on a Saturday afternoon. This is the One Roof Radio Show, and Ashley Church, who's a property commentator, is with us in the studio. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good, thanks, Tim. Good to be here again.
Yes, indeed. Kiwibuild has been dominating news of the past week, and you're a good person to talk to about this because there are a few little fiddly bits to it. But Tim, I know you're not a fan. Tell it to us straight, Tim.
To me, it's look. I accept that there's a section of society who needs help getting into houses. I'm just not convinced that people whose combined income is 180 grand a year is that part of society. What's also interesting is that they've changed the rules, Ashley, in terms of being able to flip the house that you get into through Kiwibuild. From my understanding, you couldn't have, under the old rules, you couldn't sell it for 5 years, and if you sold it before that 5-year period, you'd have to give everything to the profit that you made to the government. Now they're saying you can sell it in 3 years if you want to, and you only have to remit 30% to the government. Look,
absolutely.
We're asking the question, 0800 80 10 80, by all means give us a call. Is Kiwibuild just middle class welfare? The more I hear about it, the more it seems to be the case. What do you think?
Well, everything you've just said is correct, but there's actually a bigger sort of a context to this as well. And it's interesting because when you think about Kiwibuild, we tend to associate it with Phil Twyford because he's been pretty much associated with it during the term of this government, but actually right back to David Shearer. He actually came up with a name, and when, at least the name, and when it was first put together as a Labor policy, it was kind of built on the back of that Kiwi battler philosophy that went with Kiwi Bank, with Kiwi Rail. It was kind of in that. The problem is that in its implementation, it's been nothing like that. It's been middle class welfare. So you've got three things. And I don't blame Twyford for this because the system's kind of conspired against him. But there's been three things about it that have made it, I think, a little bit of a farce. The first one is the pricing. So these are 650,000 plus homes. They're not cheap houses. They're not affordable houses for people that are struggling to get into a house. That second one, which is kind of a symptom of that, is at 180 grand. And the reason for that, of course, is because if you're going to buy a $650,000 home, you need 180 grand combined income to afford the mortgage. The bank won't lend you money otherwise.
To get in the front door.
Absolutely. And the third one, and the one I have most of a problem with, is this idea of balloting. So I would have said if you're going to have a program for providing houses for people that can't otherwise afford them, you'd make it means tested. You'd actually provide it for people that actually needed it. This is simply balloting. It means that anybody can apply. And if you're sitting in $1 million house in St Heliers, or your parents are, and you've got a reasonable sort of wealth backing, you can still actually qualify for one of these homes if you're selected in the ballot, and that's not fair.
If it were more, so you're saying at the moment it's basically the Kiwibuild lottery for middle class people.
Well, it wasn't intended to be that, and to be fair to Twyford, that wasn't the way he put it together, but that's the way it's ended up, and that's a reflection of the fact that land's so expensive in Auckland that you simply can't build homes of this kind for under 650 grand.
So, could you just go back to that thing about means testing, because there's still the threshold of the income, so they're still checking on your financial situation.
They are, but the threshold of the income's more about loan servicing. It's got nothing to do with actually saying, hey, people over that amount don't qualify as such. It's saying basically you would need an income of that size, a household income of that size, to actually service a loan of that size. So whereas I think most people who sort of saw it in that Kiwi battler picture would have seen it as being a means-tested program that only people that actually truly qualified for a state-provided home, because that's what this is, would be able to qualify. In fact, any of us sitting in this room could actually put our names in the ballot. Well, actually, we probably couldn't because we've already owned homes. But if we didn't, we could put our names in the ballot and potentially we could qualify if our names were pulled.
I'm interested in your take on, you're saying you don't really blame Phil Twyford because is this a particular issue about the property markets he's engaging with, particularly Auckland, or is it that he just hasn't had his eye on the ball?
Part of it, he's constrained by an ideology which makes it almost impossible to do this stuff. I think that's probably the first point. It's an ideology that basically says you've got to do things in a particular way and it's not possible to deliver these properties. But when he came into this portfolio, I think he genuinely believed, as probably most of us in this room do, that he was going to put houses into the market that were going to be cheaper than the market was actually charging for the same homes, that were going to be provided for a certain section of society and were going to be affordable for those people. But the shortage is in Auckland, so that's where they've had to actually put most of these projects in play. And we're in an area where the price of land, even before you start construction, basically means that you simply can't do that. The only way you could do it is if the state started subsidising these properties, and that's a dirty word to both National and Labor. It's not likely to happen. So unless you start getting state subsidies in the construction of these things, you're not going to see any change to the policy.
Question, is this land in Auckland there must be cheaper land available. Is it just that there's no... because I'm seeing... Look, I live in a suburb, Onehunga. It's not in the city centre. It's probably, let's say, city fringe.
Yep.
And they're building Kiwibuild. I know it sounds a bit weird, but...
City fringe. Where do you live? City fringe.
It's Auckland's sprawling. It's like Los Angeles, isn't it? It's sort of like there's suburbs upon suburbs upon suburbs. I reckon they could get... They're building just around the corner, Kiwibuild. I reckon they could go out to Papakura, which is really out there, and get land for much, much cheaper.
Yeah, they could. There's other things they could do too. For example, at the moment they're building these freestanding dwellings. They could build apartment blocks. They could build construction that's dense and goes up so that the units within them were cheaper overall. And I suspect that's probably where the program will go over the time, because it's the only way they'll actually be able to deliver within the sort of price range they're talking. But in the current policy, trying to deliver a freestanding dwelling for under 650 grand is almost impossible without subsidising the construction of that property.
I think also too that they didn't realise the constraints that, as you're saying, I mean, this is what's sort of emerging, is that they wanted to do something.
Yep.
They didn't look that closely at the market, and they find now that they're going to have to somehow fit in with it.
Yeah, there was a bit of catch-up too, Tim, because when they actually first put this thing together, remember, they got into government almost... They didn't expect to win the election, so they got in with a half-formed policy, and now we find ourselves in the position that we're in.
0800 80 1080 is Kiwibuild, just middle-class welfare. What do you think, Chris?
Hi. Look, I don't think the government should be involved in the private enterprise of building houses. Look, that's just a recipe for disaster, and I truly believe that's where this is going to end up.
Why is it a recipe for disaster, do you think?
Well, the government are not private, they're not property developers. They're kidding themselves if they think that they can build houses, affordable houses. It's up to the market to handle that. And Labor were elected to reduce immigration. I'm not anti-immigration, but all they have to do is reduce immigration. The market will even itself out slowly. People will slowly move out into the regions. It's really, really simple. That's all they have to do is reduce demand for the houses.
So I have some sympathy with the first part of your point, which is to say that the government shouldn't be involved in the development. And in fact, Twyford himself actually recognised that. So they've moved increasingly toward a private model, but it's not the fact that it's either the government or the private sector building that's making these things so expensive. It's the cost of the land and the cost of construction. So because the government's not subsidising, it's effectively providing them at the same rate as would be done if the private sector were doing it themselves. With regard to the second point, which is around immigration, it's interesting because they came in on a platform of saying that they were going to cut immigration back dramatically. They've gone through the different portents of immigration in the economy. They've recognised that they've been unable to do that, and the rate of immigration stayed at the same rate it was in the previous couple of years. So while I think a lot of people might agree with that point, the difficulty of doing it, I think, has come home to roost for this government.
Thanks, Chris. Sue, hi.
Hi. Yeah, I disagree with that last guy. In most cases, the land is freehold and it costs nothing. But Phil is not building housing, he's building property ladders. And someone who said once I was wrong had very relevant comments about Kiwibuild in Rudman's article, and that's Salvation Army's Alan Johnson, and this is what he says. It is probably time to call the government's flagship Kiwibuild program for what it is, a state-sponsored gentrification of state housing suburbs, little different from the previous government's efforts in places like Tamaki. Gentrification means the middle class moving into working class areas and driving the existing incumbents out. That's why I don't like it. That's why it's disgusting, and it's worse than...
Is the idea of increasing the number of houses that are owned by... No, hang on. That are owned by first home buyers. Is that disgusting? Because Jacinda Ardern said that was one of the main reasons she was on board with the policy, was that she wanted to increase the percentage of homes that were owned by people who it was their first home.
Yeah, but you're kicking out the most vulnerable to do it and taking land that has been state house land for over 70 years. That's why it's despicable. That's why we've got a terrible, ever-increasing crisis, and it is getting much worse, because you can't take off one group and give it to people way up the top of the food chain.
Okay, so let's just see what Ashley's got to say.
Yeah, Sue, so I think what you're identifying, and I have some sympathy with what you're saying, is the fact that there's a difference between what people perceive this thing was going to be and what it's actually ended up being. There's a really good article in yesterday's Herald by Bryce Edwards where he talks about, he refers to this Kiwibuild as being what he calls Kiwi speculator, and he refers to the difference between the perception that people had, but he talks about the difference between the preconception that people had about what this was going to deliver, which was to the people that you're talking about, to the people that most needed it, and the reality, which is it's become this kind of middle-class welfare ballot and the sorts of things that you're talking about around gentrification of property. So it does still deliver property to the market, but not to the people that I think that the majority of Kiwis expected it to.
Because it's not state housing.
No, it's not.
And I think that's why I think the selling of it may have been the issue for the government, that this is not state housing. And as far as, the 90 grand and 180 total, a lot of people are fixated on that. But I think that if you're going, okay, now in Auckland, you've got to try and stop people in that income bracket from leaving, because people who are making 90 grand each, 180, look, that's good money, but those people are still leaving because they think, well, we can't really get our first home as quickly here as we want to. Yes, they could eventually, but they're leaving.
That comes into that point that Tim raised before too about changing of the criteria around having to give back any gain to the government within 5 years to having to give back 30%. And I think that's been driven primarily by, as I understand it, the bank's basically saying that erodes their equity in the property over that first 5 year period, so it increases their risk. So the government's kind of had to capitulate on that.
But can't the government say, we're the government, we want to do business with you, stuff you, we'll set the rules?
They could, but then you get into a situation where the banks say, well, we're not going to lend to that part of the market. And that comes back to the first caller's point, which is that this needs to be driven far more by the private sector than by the government.
0800 80 1080, you can be on with us and with Ashley Church. Joe, hi.
Yes, hi. I put this idea to government before, and I know it's not the lavish of houses, but nevertheless, homely and comfy. Why don't they go out and buy land, lease it to the person that is going to build, and then put up kit set homes that can be done quickly? They're quite acceptable, and all they've got to do is alter the fronts of them, build streets of them with the odd small one for elderly as well, so their homes can be given up to other people and they can come in. The corner dairy, the hall and the doctor's room are all kit set, joined together and leased out to people, the whole lot through Kiwi Bank, so that it keeps coming back. When they sell it, they have to sell the lease off.
So can I just cut in there, because you've made a couple of good points. So the first one with regard to leasing, certainly not to disagree with you with that. In fact, last time I was on the show, we talked about that very idea. But and so the government at the moment's looking at shared equity, and that's one way of actually doing that, leasing the land while building the construction. But the second point, this concept of kit set building, that's actually been around for a few years, and you're quite right. As this problem deepens, not just with regard to Kiwibuild and the government's involvement in this, but in the market as a whole, we're going to need to look at more innovative and cheaper ways of building property in order to sustain the ability for people to buy not just affordable homes, but any homes, or it's going to simply get unaffordable and people won't be able to afford to buy a house. So good ideas there.
Thanks, Joe. On to Joe.
Joe to Joe. Second Joe. Hi, Joe.
Yeah, hi, Joe.
No, I'm Tim.
I'm Tim. Sorry, Tim.
And you're Joe.
And the previous caller was Joe.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm lost.
All right.
And this is Ashley.
Okay, in Taniwha Street, they bowled two houses, which are state-owned, which was built 60 years ago, built 10 houses there on the same bit of land and sold them at $600,000 each.
Yep.
So how come are they cheap houses?
Well, they're not. That's that part of your question. They're not cheap houses, and that's the point. At 600 or 650 or whatever the current level is, they're not. The point you make there, though, which is interesting, is that they're at the intensification of the development. So if you go back to 50 years ago when they were building these houses back in the day, but they were on half an acre or a quarter of an acre, and so these massive great tracts of land, that's simply not sustainable now. So what they're doing, as you say, they're bowling those, and they're building in a much more intensified way and putting a lot more houses on them to enable them to actually use that land more effectively. But the price, I agree with you, it's an issue.
In terms of the quality of life in those smaller sections, because we do want to touch on this just a bit later in the hour. Yeah. Without a backyard, a home to many New Zealanders doesn't really feel like it just feels like a house.
There's actually two sides to that argument, and I think both of them have got validity. So there's one side that says, Kiwi homes used to be And probably in more recent years, they were 1,000 square metres, and so you had a bit
Quarter
of land
acre.
the kids could play. Absolutely. More recently, they've gone to what we call easy care, which is as little as 350 square metres. And so what's happened is...
And everything's concreted,
Yeah.
because I know it, Ashley. It's like there's no garden, there's no lawn.
But the other side to that is councils have recognised that in most parts of the country, and so what they've tended to do is to build amenities in communities that actually provide for the sorts of things that we used to do in backyards for our kids. So there is kind of a transition between doing that at home and doing it within your larger community, and there is an argument that goes both ways.
0800 80 1080. Give us a call. You can text as well on 9292. We're talking about Kiwibuild and wondering whether it's just middle-class welfare. I don't think it is. I just don't think that the government did a great job of selling what they were trying to do necessarily. Wilson's, fair to say, believes it very much is middle-class welfare. Chime in. Give us a call. 0800 80 1080. Back in just a moment alongside Ashley Church on the One Roof Radio Show. It's 4:22. Afternoon. This is the One Roof Radio Show at 4:25. Tim Roxburgh, Tim Wilson here, and Sean Mendes. You can text us on 9292. Give us a call on 0800 80 1080. Ashley Church, property commentator, is in the studio talking Kiwibuild. Is it just middle class welfare? We'll do some text in a moment. Mike first. G'day.
Yeah, g'day. I think it was Ashley who suggested sort of building more houses out in Papakura.
No, it was one of our callers, but yeah, carry on.
But I did raise Papakura, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we tried that before. I grew up in Panmure, and I was there when they started building all the state houses.
Yep.
And there was a lot of people living in the old Seabees camp at Camp Bun.
Yep.
By the Tamaki railway station, and because there was just no homes, and they had kit sets come from Canada. I think they came from. That were erected up on the slopes of Glen Innes.
Interesting. Nothing new under the sun.
But the thing was that people forget how isolated Panmure was in those days.
Mm.
You consulted a calendar, not a bloody timetable, to see whether there was a bus. And it took an hour and a half to get to the city.
There's a phrase, I think it comes from one of the Wayne's World movies, that says if you build it they will come, and there's kind of a truth in it in this stuff, which is if you build these things, and you're quoting a really good example, that over time that will actually become a new centre and development will occur around it. So my experience of that is I lived in East Coast Road on the North Shore back in the early 80s, and I used to look behind me there and it was all basically farmland and Ponderosa Egg Farm. Well, that area now is just a massive great development with apartments and housing.
With batches out there.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. So that's kind of development eventually does take place, and you just keep pushing the fringes further and further out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Kevin, g'day.
Yeah, hi. Just talking with about the gentleman that was calling about state houses around Glen Innes, and a lot of them came out from Canada. They actually came from Scandinavia. I'm actually an electrician by trade.
IKEA.
We did all the rewiring around the state houses around Glen Innes and Panmure, and a lot of those were Scandinavian homes, and they were well built.
Yep.
But what I'm also ringing about is this Kiwibuild thing. I think it should be for the people that really need it, like not the people that live in Mission Bay and stuff that can on 180k salary or something. It should be on the people that really need it so they can try and get ahead.
Well, that's state housing. That's a separate thing, isn't it?
And to be clear, the 180k is combined income, so it's not necessarily what. Although I guess if you've got one person on 180k, you split it between you've got two people, maybe married or partners.
I challenge you, Tim, though. I don't know that it is state, because state housing, and by my definition, is rental housing. It's housing that the government creates for people to rent who couldn't otherwise afford to rent or can't afford to buy a home. This is the affordable housing for purchase isn't state housing in my view. It's the government acting as a facilitator or a mediator in that part of the market to try and get people into the market, but to buy houses on their own behalf. And that's what this program was supposed to be about.
Right.
Hasn't ended up that way.
Yeah. I guess for me is that it's that thing I was saying before, that in my head I could see that you've got one sort of strategy, which is to try and help those most vulnerable, and then this is something which is a little bit different.
Yeah, there is an overlay to this too, and that is, and I guess Twyford would argue this, that over and above the whole affordability thing and the vulnerable thing, there is just a need to build more houses for whatever part of the market they cater to, because we need 10,000 houses per year every year for the foreseeable future. So if they're adding to the stock, it is still performing a service for the market.
There's a lot of focus at the moment on the fact that Twyford, in the first year, not going to get us 10,000 houses.
Yep.
That's the figure that's been bandied around.
Yep.
How do you see that playing out?
Oh, look, that was a bit of a media invention. So the media played that up, said, hey, if you're talking about 100,000 houses over 10 years, then that's 10,000 houses per year. Where are they?
Steady on. Ashley, it's just journalists doing maths. Don't be such a hater.
Fair call. That was never going to happen. That was never going to happen because they simply didn't have the capacity. So, we were talking figures early on. It might have been 1,500 in the first year, 3,000 in the second. I would expect by year 7 or 8, they'll be doing 20,000 a year. But you've got to build the capacity up to do that. They'll get their 100,000.
0800 80 1080. There we go. This is good. Having an expert, Ashley Church, in the studio with us. You can join him and us on 0800 80 1080. Bob, how's it going?
Hi. No, but look, I mean, Ashley is on the side of the profiteer, so you've always got to function that in. We should be listening to the Salvation Army above all else. Now, immigration has been way too high since about year 2000, so you can blame both governments.
You know Ashley can hear you, by the way.
I do. We can go on more.
I'm taking notes, mate.
He's here.
But including the real estate agents, by the way. But while the provinces, need workers, including on dairy farms and everything else, there's just far too many have come into Auckland. It's crazy, and it's still going. It's blowing out the choice farmland of Pukekohe, and we're now getting to the point where we'll import food when we should be growing it there. The basic problem, social housing, whether you just sell it outright or rent it outright, the government does that. I mean, the first Labor government did it brilliantly. The problem is the Nats have now sold off a lot of the state housing. What Phil Twyford needs is a huge housing factory with prefab houses and insulated panels. If he had one of those, he could get on quickly. But it's turned into middle-class welfare, noting, of course, that will get swinging voters to Labor the way they're doing it at the moment, so it's good for votes. But a bigger problem is that Grant Robertson is not releasing enough state money into doing it. That's why it's gone sort of half-private instead. It's a compromise.
Yeah.
He goes with the orthodox banking system, and he won't go with expanding Kiwi Bank.
But Rob, isn't that the way that it's essentially policy eventually ends up being enacted? It's always a compromise. I want to hear more from the profiteer, Ashley Church.
I'm not sure what part of the prices are too high, balloting's unfair on the vulnerable, and 180 grand's too high for family incomes about actually being on the side of profiteers. But however, because I'm actually of the view that in fact this thing should be for the vulnerable, and that it hasn't been. Look, I think you've made some reasonable points, and again, it just comes back to that point that I made before, which is the perception that people had of what this was going to be versus what it's turned out to be. There's a mismatch, and so Tim's point about not selling the thing properly in the early stages, I think, has got some real resonance, because at the moment, people expect it to be one thing and it's delivering in another way.
But here's the deal, and look, I was chatting with my wife about Kiwibuild just the other day, and she's like, wasn't that supposed to be houses for poor people?
Yes.
I don't think when Labor were coming in that they were happy for that idea to float around, or at least I didn't hear much correction of that misconception.
No.
Because when we were talking about that quote unquote housing crisis, and it was a sort of a freewheeling. At the time, remember the election, back to the election, there we were talking about people living in cars, we were talking about social housing, and this was being touted as the answer. We're going to build a whole heap of houses, 100,000 over that period. This is the answer. So there's sort of like the bagginess of those promises, I think, is coming back to bite them.
But I don't think it was a misconception. I think that was what Labor came in on the platform of doing. That's what they thought they were going to do. And I think that the realities of the market and what they've actually found have basically disabused them of that idea, and they've realised that if they're going to deliver, it's going to be at this much higher level, which wasn't the intention.
I think what you said about the name, so the name, when we attach it, when we put the word Kiwi in something, then it does sound like it's for the battler. Not that Kiwi Bank is just for the battlers, but there is kind of a
perception that it's ours.
Yeah, perception that wrapping your arms around you and looking after you kind of thing.
Kiwi Rail actually out. I mean, do we want that?
Yeah.
But
there's always exceptions.
But back to what you were saying, Tim, that in all the conversations about the housing crisis, that wasn't just about people who are sleeping in cars. That was people who might have decent jobs who cannot afford to live, particularly in our larger city.
People who felt locked out of the market. And look, can I also stress the felt part of this? in the sense that, I have millennials coming up to me saying, oh, I'm never going to get a house. I'm like, do you think that these that the conditions of the market now will exist for the rest of eternity? So markets fluctuate, they go up, they go down. And look, what are we looking at currently? 70-year lows in interest mortgage rates.
3.95% from ANZ.
I mean, you compare that with, say, the interest rates in the 80s, 18, 19, 20%. It's quite different.
Let's go back to the phones. JT, g'day.
Hi there. I just want to make the point that immigration is down 14% on last year. As far as that first built house, it was actually a modest house because although it was 4-bedroom, it was only 120 square metres. Now, Kiwibuild is not middle-class welfare. To me, it's just the government's response to the market failure that happened under John Key.
Yeah. Look, a couple of things. I've seen some different figures around immigration, but whether it's at least 14% or slightly up on last year, the point is that it's not the big cut in immigration that was being proposed even a year ago. We're in quite a different space than we were. Second point, take that as your opinion, obviously, and let that go.
The immigration thing, and when we talk about, this is what I love about when we talk housing, is we talk so many things. I think we talk aspirations, we talk about social policy like immigration, all of those things factor in. The immigration cut has really just been that a whole bunch of people who are here on 3-year visas, the visa's up, they can't reapply, they're going home. It's just essentially just a natural decline.
It's an interesting old philosophical debate too, because the argument is, there was quite some scathing comments talking about how the economic growth under the previous government was driven by immigration, as if somehow that was a bad thing. But I mean, I've always seen it's a little bit like saying if I own a shop, and I've got lots of customers coming in, and somebody coming in and saying to me, well, the only reason you're doing well as a business is that you've got customers coming in. It's essentially the same thing. Immigration's about people wanting to come to our country and live here and add to the economy. So
that's true on the economic level,
sure.
and we've got callers waiting. We'll get to that quickly. But there is also a change, I think, in the cultures that they bring with us. And I don't think a lot of Kiwis felt that we had a big discussion about what immigration meant.
I think that's fair.
There were just a whole bunch of people showing up.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Trevor, welcome along.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about they didn't sell it very well. I mean, have you ever heard anybody that wasn't surprised about the first buy? I mean, I don't think they sold it at all very well. Almost to the point is they're either fooling us or they weren't telling us the truth. I'm thinking that first couple, which was their showpiece. So the government is saying if you earn $180,000, you can't buy a house. I mean, houses have never been easy to buy, unless you, of course, have got a good mum and dad that'll give you a bit of money. But houses for other people have always been very difficult to buy.
Trevor, I don't think they were deceiving us. I think they simply, as I said before, I think they didn't expect to be in government. They came in and had to cobble together a policy pretty quickly, and I think that they didn't, maybe it was naivety, but they didn't actually understand the market as well as they needed to, and they're starting to come to terms with that now.
Yeah, and just the other thing, I mean, I just cannot understand the first house that they put together, they gave a couple a 4-bedroom house. I mean, what do these couples say? They're going to start children immediately? I mean, I thought it was such a desperate situation. They were going to be very careful about who got houses and who didn't.
Read the fine print.
Yeah, I think if you read the fine print, I think they've got to have children within a year, Trevor.
Hey, look, actually,
that's not true, by the way.
I want to get just in terms of, because we've talked about this sort of the historic ability to buy houses.
Yep.
So go back, let's say, because we often hear from people on the, when we do these shows about, look, I struggled to buy a house. Can you compare, say, buying a house in the 70s, 80s with buying a house now? Was it easier back then? Is it harder now?
Again, and I hate to keep doing this, but there's arguments both ways. There's an argument that says that relative to what people were earning at the time, that it was as difficult. But you can't escape the fact that even as recently as 2001, it took 4.2 times the average household income to buy a house in Auckland. It now takes over 9 times the average household income. So that tells you it's actually got considerably harder, and there's nothing to suggest that's going to stop. In fact, so it's going to
that's going to go down. It's going to go up.
That's right.
Oh, look, it has to be harder. Anytime you've done talkback and spoken with people who have memories of being on one income and one modest income, and being able to buy a house, one modest income and a child and being able to buy a house.
But the solution to that, Tim, is not to continue building freestanding homes and expect people to be able to afford to buy those at $650,000. The solution is to find other ways to actually build more dense housing so that we can actually house people.
I agree. I agree. And I think that a lot of Kiwis have a visceral reaction against dense housing because we've seen so much bad high-density housing.
Exactly.
But it doesn't have to be bad just by being dense.
Is this a time just to raise the
Wellington thing?
The Wellington thing,
Yeah.
and this is and of course you can call 0800 80 10 80, but what is it? 70 homes or units in the size of a rugby field. We've got to run to a break, but we will talk about that.
Sure.
All right, it's 21 minutes to 5. NewsTalk ZB.
You're so special to me. All that I want and need. You're so special.
NewsTalk ZB, Saturday afternoon, Weekend Collective, and Tim Roxburgh, Tim Wilson here at 18 to 5. Ashley Church is our property expert in the studio for the One Roof Radio Show, 0800 80 1080, if you'd like to be on. Walter, hi.
Yeah, good afternoon. Here's a couple of things that might be of interest to people. When I first arrived in New Zealand in 1952, one of the first jobs I got was a truck driver. And I delivered those Scandinavian pre-cut houses to Elston, Tidai Bay, and out to Pororua. And at the same time, they were building the Haywoods power station, and I delivered all the, well, not all of it probably, but most of the machinery out there.
Do you know what I'm finding fascinating about this, and you're about the third caller who's talked about these homes from Scandinavia, is that because there's a lot of talk about that at the moment. Clearly it's happened before, so obviously nothing's original, and we've done this before. There's no reason why we shouldn't do it again.
Thank you very much, Walter. Evan, hello.
Hello. When I first heard about Kiwibuild, I thought it was like going to be like a shared ownership type thing where, you know, the government might build a $350,000 house and then they get someone like I'd be a perfect, well, I thought I was right in, like me and my partner just scraping over the six-figure salary. We got one kid, renting, trying to get into a first home, like we'd get a slightly smaller mortgage to be able to get us in and then have like shared ownership with the government.
Yep.
And then after 5 years or whatever, when we want to buy our own home on our own, we sell our sort of portion with a little bit of capital gain on whatever the value's gone up a little bit, and then the next, you know, young family get to come in and have their turn, and then, you know, and so on and so on.
Well, this isn't a bad idea. Let's put it to the property expert. How would that work?
It's not a bad idea, and so what you're describing is a shared equity scheme, and in fact both Labor and National have got policies around shared equity. Labor's talking about introducing one over the next 12 months or so, so it is a good idea. It is something they're looking at, but it's not what Kiwibuild was about.
Thanks, Evan. Jimmy, hi.
Oh, hello. Yeah, I'm living in the Glenelg Palmure area, and we had a meeting with Phil Twyford with his so-called friendly Labour government, and he agreed that the sale of state houses was okay to hand them over for nothing to the Tamaki regeneration, and they're selling them for $1.25–1.5 million. John Key privatised 69,000 state houses were built for low-income families in the 1930s by the first Labour government. Now people have been evicted, and where are they going to go from Glenelg and Palmure? As I speak to you, people have been evicted from Palmure, 2,800 families to be railroaded. I mean, so-called free Labour government, I mean, it's pathetic. And for, I mean, people, we got to solve the problem because more people are being thrown out on the road and becoming destitute. And like the article in the Herald that was a couple of days ago, homeless in this winter, the worst in years.
Okay, that's a question about homelessness, which I think is not the same as people being thrown out, quote unquote, thrown out.
There's a relationship between the two, though. There are two very real problems. One of the problems is that the government needs to build as many houses as possible, as quickly as possible, at whatever price. The other problem is that we've got homelessness that we need to address. And so what they're doing by for example, the Tamaki development that you're talking about is a really good example, is they are addressing the first part of that problem. They're building more homes, but in doing that, they are exacerbating the second problem. So, you know, that's a difficult one. It's difficult to know how you can actually address both of those at the same time.
Trudy, welcome.
Oh, hello.
Hello. What's on your mind?
Trudy, hello.
Oh, well, lots of things, because I've heard a lot of people speaking since I rang up. So
Okay, well, give us your take on it, your opinion. What did you want to say?
For one, my husband and I live in the far north, and we had 1 week to find somewhere to live. Otherwise, we were trying to get public housing, and that was going to take about 8 months. So I don't know where we're going to go in between. But luckily, we found somewhere.
Yep.
Talking about buying a house as a young couple, it's virtually impossible. My first husband and I, when we came back from England, we were paying 21% on a mortgage. That was in the late 80s, and then when I got shafted off, and I was paying trying to pay $450 a week.
Actually, the texts are coming in to support you on this. Just FYI from John, it was not easy to buy a house in the early 1970s. Interest rates were as high as 23%, and a wife's income could not be factored into repayments. That's according to John.
Yeah, so apart from the fact that interest rates didn't hit it's close to 20% until the mid-80s, that's broadly correct. They were a lot lower in the 70s.
But I like the historic. This is why we've got Ashley Church here. This is why we've got Ashley Church in the house. That's broadly correct.
Right.
If he ever says something that we say is broadly correct, Roxy, we'll feel that we've been ticked off.
But the other aspect of this is, and you're quite right, is that one of the reasons that housing prices have gone up in the last cycle, and there are different reasons for different cycles, one of them is because money's been cheap. So cheaper money has allowed people to actually spend more to buy the house that they wanted. When money was more expensive, that acted as a kind of a dampener to keep prices down. So there's a relationship between the two.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's a really interesting relationship.
Just to wrap up, let's have a quick word about this story about 70 houses which are going to be squeezed into land the size of a rugby field in Wellington. And one article was saying that is this the fading of the quarter-acre dream in New Zealand? Ashley, what would you say to people who are very anti the idea of intensification?
I'd say that's probably. I understand why they're against it. I mean, I'm not all that keen on the idea myself, but there's a kind of inevitability to it because the alternative is that people just won't be able to afford to buy houses, and that's not an option for a property-owning democracy.
It's the sprawl thing. It's upward versus outward.
Yep. There's all sorts of unintended consequences in Auckland. So in the unitary plan that came out a year or so back, the impact of that's going to be that people have had view lines out over the harbour and volcanoes and things for the last 30 odd years are going to lose those.
But there's but in terms of intensity, there's also, I speak as someone who lived in New York, and 60,000 per square mile. We're not going to see that level of intensity. But there is higher levels of stress associated with people living so close to one another. There are transport issues. There are all kinds of infrastructure and, I suppose, well-being. The government's been talking about well-being. I don't know if... look, I understand how it has to answer that capacity question. I don't know how it's going to answer the well-being.
So here's an interesting point to end on. I know we're running close on time. We're actually going to end up with a situation where Auckland and potentially Christchurch are going to need to intensify simply because of the limitation of land and the need to provide housing for larger populations. Cities like Palmerston North, Napier, Timaru, other places that don't have that problem are going to become much more attractive for places for people to live. And as the digital economy allows people to do business in other parts of the country, we're going to get people to moving to those because they're nicer places to be.
Palmy, it's the new Paris of
Absolutely.
New Zealand.
And they're getting the fancy new rooftop bar in the old office building, which has been converted into a hotel. I've been harping on about this because it's just that rooftop bar and Palmerston North don't traditionally go hand in hand.
I lived in Palmy for 2 or 3 years. Don't slag it. It was not a bad place.
It's not a bad place, and you've got our Shandy correspondent, Tim Roxburgh, all over
I'll tell you what, that rooftop bar, you've got the snowy mountains in the far distance. Good times. Great music. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, that's my cliche. It's like better living, everyone.
Yeah.
Ashley Church, our special guest.
Thanks, Ashley.
No worries.
10 minutes to 5, NewsTalk ZB.